Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to talk about variables and data types. You are going to learn what are variables, what are data types, what are most commonly used data types in programming, as well as what are some common errors that happen to many beginners. And we are going to demonstrate all of this in a simple program that we will create together. And also, I'm going to explain all of this on real world examples so that it is beginner friendly and you can understand everything. And before we continue, I want to say thank you to the sponsor of this video, and that is me. So my goal is to teach you practical programming so that you can finally start creating the applications that you want and so that you can get career ready skills. And in this course, you are going to learn everything that you need in order to start creating those applications that you want. So it is going to be beginner to expert practical programming course. Everything that you need is going to be in one place, and it is going to be explained in a beginner friendly way so that you can finally understand programming. The course was released a month and a half ago, and I can already say that I'm very proud of all of the students who have enrolled in the course, and I'm also very proud of their results. Just today, I was talking to a girl who enrolled in the course less than a month ago, and the reason why she decided to enroll in this course is because her mom has a personal business. She is producing jewelry for girls, and her mom does not have enough money to pay to a professional programmer to create an application that she needs to manage her clients and to make her work easier. So her daughter decided to learn practical programming with the help of my course so that she can create this application as a gift to her mother. And in less than a month of learning from my practical programming course, she was able to fully plan this application and create it herself. So because of that story and many other stories that my students have shared with me, I can say that I'm very, very proud of the progress that they had made. And also I'm proud of the work and the contribution that I'm giving to those students. So if you also want to learn practical programming, if you want to start creating real applications, I will leave a link in the description so that you can also enroll in my practical programming course. We have a great community of striving developers that are ready to help you, that want to collaborate and share their experiences. And also, I have a special gift for my YouTube viewers. So the first 100 people who decide to enroll in the course using the link in the description will get a special discount. So if you want to learn practical programming, if you want to start creating real applications, then don't miss this opportunity. Click the link in the description and I will see you in my practical programming course in a minute. So with that being said, let's continue with the topic of today's video. So let's create an application where we can demonstrate variables and data types. For that, we are going to need Visual Studio 2022 Community. If you don't know how to install it, then make sure to watch my previous video where I explained that. It will be linked here and also in the description. So I already have Visual Studio 2022, so let's run it. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a new project. So click on Create a New Project. Okay, here we are going to select C#, and here I will select console application. So C# console application and click on Next. Okay, and here we will give a name to our project. Let's call it Variables and Data Types. Okay, everything should be together. Everything together, variables and data types, and click on Next. And here you should select .NET 8.0 framework and click on Create. Okay, and this is going to create our project. So this is the project that we get by default. This is the most simple hello world application. And if we run it, we will simply get this hello world output in our console. And then this is some junk text that Visual Studio creates. This should not bother you right now. So as I said, this is the most simple application that we get when we create our project. And if you don't understand this, again, make sure to watch my previous video in this playlist. It will be linked in the description. Okay, so now I am going to delete this comment. We will not need it, and I will leave this part because we will need it later. So now let's explain what are variables. I'm going to give you an example from real life. For example, in real life, you have different types of containers, different types of boxes for storing different items. For example, you have one type of container, one type of box that is used to store shoes, and then another type of box, another type of container that is used to store food. And then this also is a type of container, this cup, that is used in order to store liquid. So inside this, you can put water, milk, tea, juice, and so on. So the same way in programming, variables are containers that are used in order to store different types of data. For example, in variables, we can store an image, a character, a number, a decimal number, and so on. Now, the same way that you wouldn't try to store shoes inside this type of container, you also wouldn't try to store an image in a variable that is used to store numbers. So each variable has its type, and that type determines what kind of data it can store. In programming, we have simple and complex data types. In this video, we are going to learn what are most commonly used simple data types, and then in some of the next videos in the future, we are going to learn about complex data types. So here on the screen, I am going to put a list of most commonly used simple data types, and those are integer. It is used to store whole numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, -1, -2, -3, and so on. So that is int data type. And then we have double, and double is used in order to store decimal numbers. So 2.5, -2.5, and so on. And then we have char, and the char data type is used in order to store one single character. That can be a letter or some special character. So that is char data type. If you want to store more than one character, then you use another data type, and that data type is called string. And inside string variable, you can store your name, or a name of the person that you like, or an entire sentence, or an essay. So string variable can hold as many characters as you want, and char variable can hold only one. And then another commonly used data type is bool, and bool is used for variables that can have only two values, true or false, 1 or 0. An example of that is, for example, is user logged in? That can have only two values. Either he is logged in or he is not logged in, so true or false. So those are most commonly used data types in programming. So let's see how we can create a variable. I will do it here above this line of code. So here I want to create a variable that will be used to store whole numbers, so integer numbers. The first thing that we need to specify is the type of variable. So since we want to store integer numbers, the type will be int, and then we give the name to our variable. So let's call it YouTube subscribers, because the number of YouTube subscribers can be an integer number. You cannot have 2.5 subscribers. So here I am going to write how many subscribers I have. Let me check that and I'll be back. So I have 269,000 at the moment of filming this video. Let me know if that changed in the comment section. So you put the value that will be stored inside that variable, and then at the end you need to put this semicolon symbol, because by putting that you say, okay, here is the end of the command that I have written. So here I have created a variable called YouTube subscribers. It is of type int, which means that it can store only whole numbers. And here I have assigned the value to that variable. So now what I can do is I can take this variable, and then here, instead of writing hello world in my console, I can simply pass the name of my variable, and this here should print whatever value is stored inside this variable. So console.writeLine, and then here you put the name of the variable. So now if I run the program, let's see, we should get this value here. As you can see, it says 269000. Okay, now I have a question for you, and that is the following. What is going to happen if I try to store a decimal point number into this variable here? We already said that this int variable is used in order to store integer numbers, which means whole numbers. So what will happen if I try to store here a decimal point number, for example, 2.5? Let me know in the comment section. Okay, so if I try to run my program, as you can see, we get errors, which means that this here is not valid. Now, depending on the programming language that you use, there are two things that might happen. In C#, as you could already see, we will get an error and we will not be able to run our program. And some other programming language will maybe just take this whole part of the number and then it will completely disregard this that comes after decimal point. That depends on the programming language that you use, but those are two things that can potentially happen. As you could see, in C# we get an error and this is not allowed. So I am going to return this to as it was. And now I'm going to show you how to create a decimal point variable. So for that, we use another data type, and that is double. So I say double, and then I give the name to my variable. Let's say age. Okay, and here I will store my age, let's say 21.5. Okay, this is not my age, but it's just an example, guys. So if you want to store a decimal point number, you need a variable of type double. So now I am going to put here age, and if I run my program, we will get 21.5. So whatever is stored inside this age variable, that will be printed here. Okay, so here you can already see a pattern. When you want to create a variable, you first specify its data type, and then you give it a name, is equal to, and then you provide the value for your variable, and at the end you put semicolon. Now let's see how we can create variables of the other data types, because there are some specific rules. For example, if you want to create a character variable, the type would be char, and then you give the name to this variable. Let's call it gender. Okay, is equal to, and then you are going to assign the value, which is just one character, but you need to put it inside these single quotation marks. So here you need to provide one character that will be the value for this variable. So you can put F for female, or M for male, or C for cat, or D for dog, and so on. This was much less complicated when I was first studying programming, because there was just F and M. Nowadays, there are a lot more potential values, but I am just going to leave this to be an F, because I am just an F. You can put anything that you want as long as it's just one character, because char variable can accept only one character. And if you want to store more than one character, then you use a different data type, and that is string. So let's create a string variable. Let's say string, and the name of this variable will be, let's say, first name. Okay, and when you want to assign the value to a string variable, you need to use double quotation marks. So for char, you use single quotation marks, and then for string, you use double quotation marks, and for numbers, you don't need anything. So here I will put my first name, and that is Saldina. Okay, and then semicolon at the end. So this is how you create a string variable. And then the easiest one is bool variable. So type is called bool, and this variable can hold only two values, true or false. So the name of this will be, for example, is student. And for myself, I will say false, because I am not a student. If you are a student, you can assign a different value. You can say true, and those are only two values that this bool variable can have, so either true or false. So here we have learned how we can create variables of different data types. And we have learned one very important characteristic of variables, and that is each variable has a data type, and it determines what kind of data we can put into that variable. The same way that type of container determines what kind of item we put into that container. Into this container, we put liquid. We don't put shoes. Now, another important characteristic of this container is its size, which means inside this glass, I can put 100 milliliters of water or 200 milliliters, but 500? I don't think so. It would overflow because this glass has size. So the same way our variables, our data types have size. For example, integer variable can hold whole numbers, but how big of a number can we put inside an integer variable? Well, let's see. I am going to copy this code and paste it here. And here I will need to change the name of my variable because you cannot have two variables with the same name because you will get an error. So let's change the name. Let's call it whole number. Okay, so it can hold this number, but can it hold this number? Let's see. Okay, after some point, you get this little red squiggly, and that means that you have an error. And the reason is because this number is too big and you cannot put it inside a variable that is of this type, because integer type cannot store number that is this big, the same way that inside this glass we cannot put 1,000,000 liters of water. Okay, for that we need a bigger glass, and for storing a number that is this big, we need a different data type. And the name of that data type is long. So here I will say long. And as you could see, that little red squiggly that we had here disappeared, which means that we don't have error anymore. So even though both int and the long store the same type of data, which means a whole number, inside int we can store much smaller numbers, and inside long we can store much bigger numbers, like this one, which I will not try to read. The reason for this is because long data type takes a lot more space in memory than int data type, which takes a lot less. Now, each data type takes certain space in memory, and now your question might be, how can I know how much an integer takes, how much a long takes, or double, or char, and so on? Well, you have a special command that will give you the amount of memory that each data type takes. For example, here inside my console.writeLine, I can say, please give me the size of, and here inside parentheses, I will put size of what? So I want size of int, okay, and then another line, I also want size of long. Okay, so if I run the program, let's see. Here it says that int takes 4 bytes and long takes 8 bytes, which means that long is twice as big as integer, which means that it can take twice as big of a number as integer. So now your question might be, okay, Saldina, but 4 bytes isn't really a lot of memory, so I will always use long. You can always use long, but there are two reasons why we have both int and long data type. The first reason is that this need for saving memory comes from a different time, from a time where I was very small and you were also very small, and the memory was very expensive. Nowadays you have phones that have 2 terabytes of memory, but 50 years ago, 4 megabytes of memory was much more expensive than what your phone costs now. So in that time, it was very important to save as much memory as possible. So that is the first reason. Another reason is the following. Now you are creating just one variable of type int or long. That is 4 bytes of difference. But later, when we learn how we can create arrays of variables, how you can create, for example, 1,000,000 variables, then you have to take in consideration if those variables are going to be of type long or of type int, because then it's not just 4 bytes of memory, it's 4,000,000 bytes of memory, which is significant. It will make your application heavier, slower, and so on. So those are 2 reasons why you need to know the difference between int and long. And now when you're just a beginner and you are learning, it doesn't really matter for your tasks which one of these two you are using. But in the future, it might matter and it might be very important. So that is why I'm telling you the difference between these two data types. So once more, long is twice as big as int, which means that it can store twice as big number than integer. So now the question is, do you have to learn by heart how big of a number we can store inside integer, for example? And the answer is no. There is another command that we can use for that. So here inside my console write line, I can say int dot, please give me what is the min value that can be stored inside this integer. And then here I will say, please give me int dot max value, which means the maximum number that can be stored inside an integer. So now if I run my program, let's see that. Okay, so here we get minus 2,147,000,000 and something. And then this here is plus 2,147,000,000 and so on. So this is minimum number, and this here is maximum number that you can store inside an integer variable. Now, if you know that you will be storing only positive numbers in your variable and not negative, for example, for our YouTube subscribers variable, it can store only positive numbers. You cannot have -1 subscriber. If you want to say that specifically, then you can use another data type. And that data type is called unsigned int, meaning there is no plus or minus sign in front of it, just positive numbers, and it is called uint, so unsigned int. And here you cannot store negative numbers. So if I try to assign here minus 269000, as you can see, we get this little red squiggly, which means that we have an error. So now the question is, why would you use uint instead of int? Well, you previously saw that the values for integer go from -2 billion and something to +2 billion and something. But if you already know that you will be storing only positive numbers, then that range can go from 0 to 4 billion something, which means that you have the option to store much bigger of a number. If you know upfront that you will be storing only positive numbers, you don't need at all that negative range. So let's demonstrate that. Let's remove this minus sign, and here I will say uint minimum value and then uint maximum value like this. And if I run this program, as you can see, minimum value of unsigned integer is 0, and then maximum value is 4 billion and something, which is much bigger than what we had previously with a simple int variable. So again, this is used with the purpose of saving memory and optimizing your application. Now, when you're still a beginner, it doesn't really matter. You will not have an error if you always use long. But if you want to optimize your application, if you want to save some memory later when you become a good experienced programmer, then you should know about these things. So we talked enough about int and long and uint. Let's see if there is anything special about these remaining data types. So char, as we said, is used in order to store one character, nothing special there. And then string is used in order to store a string of characters, so one or more characters, for example, a name, a sentence, an essay, and so on. Nothing special there. Bool, also just two values, true or false, nothing special. But double is very, very special. Double is used in order to store decimal point numbers. But there are two more types that are used for the same thing, for the same purpose, but there is a difference between them. So here, let's create another variable of type double. Let's call it decimal number 1, like this. And here I will say, for example, 2.5. Okay, so this is how we create double variable, but there are two more types that are used for the same purpose, meaning to store decimal numbers. Those are float and decimal. So I'm going to copy this, and here I will say float, and I will call this variable decimal number 2. Okay, and here, in order to indicate that this is float, I need to put f, okay, and that red squiggly error will disappear. And then Another type is decimal. So here I will say decimal, and here I will call it decimal number 3. And here I need to put M in order to indicate that this is decimal number. So double does not have any suffix, float has F, and decimal has M. So now the question is, what is the difference between these three? So the difference is in their size, which means how big of a number you can put inside each one of these three data types. So let's check that. Again, I will use size of operator. So I will say, please give me the size of double. Okay, and I need another parentheses. And then I will also say, please give me the size of float, another parentheses, and then the last one is decimal. So please give me the size of decimal. So now let's run our program and let's check the sizes of these three. Okay, and as you can see, it says double is 8 bytes, float is 4 bytes, and decimal is 16 bytes, which means that float is the smallest and decimal is the biggest. Double is in the middle. It is twice as big as float. So depending on how big of a number you need to store, you are going to use one of these three. Okay. And one very important thing that I said and that I want you to remember is if you want to store a bigger number, you need to use a bigger data type, because that big number has a lot of digits that you need to write in your memory, and a bigger data type has more space in memory where you can write all of those digits. Now, the same applies for very small numbers. For example, you cannot store a number that is this big inside a float variable, but you cannot also store a number that is this small inside float variable, because both of these numbers have a lot of digits, and for storing all of these digits, you need bigger space in memory. So even though the number is smaller, you need a data type which is bigger, which is more precise, in order to store a number that has this many digits. Now let's talk about another very important topic, and that is naming your variables. There are many rules that tell you what you should do and what you should not do when naming your variables, and I am going to explain both. So let's first start with the things that you should not do. So let's create a variable. Let's say that I will create a variable of type double, and I will call it age. And here comes the first rule. And immediately we get this red squiggly. And the reason why we are getting this red squiggly is because we already have a variable with the same name. We have it here. So this error says a local variable or function named age is already defined, meaning you cannot repeat the name. And even if you change the type of this variable, again, it will not allow you to use a name that already exists. So that is the first rule. You should not have two variables with the same name. There are certain specific situations that we will learn later in the upcoming lessons where you can create variables with the same name, but for now, at this level, don't repeat the names of your variables. There is plenty of names. For example, here you can say age 2. That is perfectly valid name. And as you can see, that little red squiggly disappeared, which means that we don't have an error anymore. So the first rule, don't repeat the names of your variables. The second rule is that the name of your variable cannot start with a number. This here is not a valid name. You can have a number at the end of the name or in the middle of the name, but not at the front. So the name of your variable cannot start with a number. As you can see here, we get identifier expected, syntax error, blah, blah, blah. A lot of errors that are very hard to understand for beginners. And the reason for that is because the name of the variable cannot start with a number. So that is the second rule. The third rule is that you cannot have spaces in the names of your variables. For example, this here is not valid. So the name of your variable needs to be one single word or multiple words, but written together with no spaces. Also, you can use underscore like this, or for example, you can say my age like this, but you cannot use other special characters or space. So you cannot say this, nor this, nor this. So if you need to separate the words, you can use underscore. So those are some things that you cannot do. Now let's see what you should do when naming your variables. I will give you one rule to rule them all so that you don't have to remember all of these individual rules. And that is the following. Give meaningful names to your variables and use camel case. What does that mean? Give meaningful names to your variables means name your variables according to their purpose. For example, YouTube subscribers, age, gender, first name, and so on. You can also name these variables var1 and then var2 and then var3 like this. But this is not really understandable, and in a few days you will not remember what var1 represents, what var2 represents, what var3, and so on. So for that reason, give meaningful names to your variables. That is first part. And the second part is use camel case. So what does camel case mean? It means that the name of your variable should start with the lowercase letter, and then if the name contains more than one word, each new word should start with a capital letter and everything should be together. For example, like this, or like this, or like this, or if you want to give a bigger name, then you can use camel case for that, like this. So here is a bigger name for my variable. Like this. This is pretty big name, but you get the idea of what camel case is. So I believe that is going to be enough for this video. If you have any questions or any topics that you would like to see in the future, let me know in the comment section. Also, if this video was useful, if you enjoyed it, give it a big thumbs up so that I know to create more videos like this in the future. And if you want to learn practical programming, if you want to learn how to build real applications, then join my practical programming course. The link will be in the description, and there you can get career-ready skills. You will also join a community of very successful developers, of thriving developers that can help you to optimize your progress and to learn programming as fast as possible. Also, currently we have a special discount for the first 100 people who sign up using the link in the description. So if you want to learn practical programming, click the link in the description and I will see you in a minute. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!